This feature might be the biggest one that has landed in Angular so far. Let's get into it. So the team Angular has sent this RFC called built-in control flow. Now this is really interesting because it changes the way we write Angular code. Not really a lot, but still some of the directives would change. So what does this really mean? Let's go through this quickly and let me know in the comments what do you think about this. So if I summarize this for you, the idea for the Angular team that they have proposed is the way we write the control flow of our Angular applications. For example, having the ngIf condition. So if we wanted to conditionally render something, how would we do that? And similarly, if we had to have an else condition right after ngIf, how would we do that? If we wanted to have a switch case to control the flow and especially the template, what gets rendered, how do we do that? But that also doesn't stop at ngIf. It also goes towards ng4 because there you have an array through which you want to, or an iterable, and you want to render based on that. So what have they basically proposed? I'm going to just summarize it so you don't have to read all of it, but I would still encourage you to read all of it because there's a lot of explanation right here why they chose certain things over the others. Why did they not go with X or Y or Z? Why didn't why did they not go with JSX, for example? So what do we mean right there? So consider this particular example. So if I wanted to have a conditional render, what they're proposing is something like this, having something called a control block. So having a control block means that I start with a condition. This is the start of this block. We call this primary block, and this is the end of the block. So this whole thing essentially is an if condition, but we also have some nested blocks as well. So in this particular case, you can imagine this primary block starting from here, ending here, and this is the main condition. So whatever you put here would be rendered. But if you start a nested block, then that means that this is an else condition having another if. So it's an else if, just like JavaScript control flow. And if this condition is true, then this extra case would be rendered and not this one, of course. And finally, you can have an else condition as well, in which this would render. Now this makes things so much easier because we used to see, hey, if we have users list, then render the list, otherwise render just a simple text that says no data or something like that. This makes it much easier. Also, it's not just about list, but any element or any variable that we looked at in Angular. Then we also have the switch condition. Now this is pretty interesting. And here you can see that the switch condition looks like this. So you have a switch block that starts, and then you have a condition. You specifically put the condition here, and then you have multiple case blocks that you can see. One of the changes that you would notice compared to JavaScript or TypeScript when it comes to switch cases is that the proposed Angular control flow does not have the break statements, because in this particular case, as they say, Angular switch does not have a fall through, so there's no break operation required. So if you have a particular case, essentially this would just stop here. I'm wondering if you could have multiple cases that could render one thing. I did not see that here, but maybe that's something that you could ask on the comment, or maybe I'll ask when I get some time. But the idea is that, for example, if I have a particular variable or condition, I could see the case here and render based on that particular case. This is case 2, case 3, and then if none of the cases match, we do have this default that gets shown. Now this looks really nice to me. Why? Because I've been working with Angular for about a decade, 10 years of Angular. I started when there was Angular JS in the beginning, and my first day at my work was to understand what Angular JS is and to teach or to come up with an explanation to one of my seniors who were working on Flash, because we had to migrate something from Flash to HTML5. Working with Angular for so long, I really like this. One of the reasons I like this control flow block is because now I don't really have to have a parent element with the ng switch directive, because previously you had to have that. So if you wanted to work with a switch condition, you would have to have a parent with the ng switch directive, then you would have the child ng switch case directives, and then ng switch case default, as far as I remember. But this means that I can have the control flow code right there and just render the elements that I want. I don't have to have a parent element right there. And this makes things much easier for me. Then let's go to the for. So in this case, you can see there are some improvements to this. So instead of using ng for, we would have a block for the for loop, and it is directly one-to-one with the JavaScript for off loop, which runs on iterables. So in here, you can see that it starts with the for block, and then it ends with this for block here. So this is the primary block, and this particular code is the rendering part of this primary block. Why only this? Because this is a nested block. And in this nested block, we are saying, hey, if we don't have anything in the items, that is, the items are empty, which means that the items should be an array and it should be empty. Then we can say there are no items in the list. So this saves so many things, like just putting here ng if items, but item dot length equals 0. Instead of that, I could just say empty, and this makes things much easier. But even more than that, what I really like about this one is the track. Previously, we used to have the track by function in ng4. So if I go to, for example, Angular ng4, we can actually compare that with what we have today. For example, in here, we did have a track by function. So we needed to provide a function which returns a particular value so it can track. And that was a lot of code, because all the time I would have to first, let's go back there. No, where did I go? Go back. So I was right here. Let's scroll down. Yeah, in here. So you can see that I actually had to create a lot of functions just for the sake of performance, of course, for ng4. And that function had just one statement, just giving like what is the key that the ng4 loop should look at for identifying a particular item. And this was majorly the case. I wouldn't have anything else in this function. So that is the question I had myself as well. Like, why can't we just use user.id in the template, in the HTML side, and have this function? Why do I need this function? And that makes it much easier in the control flow, that now instead of having the track by function, I do have this opportunity to say, hey, use this particular key. And now you would be thinking, hey, what if the item does not have an ID? For example, if I'm running a loop over just an array of or array of strings, for example, or an array of numbers, then what? So then you just say track item, in which the item itself is the identity. And if you scroll down, you're going to see comments discussing exactly the same thing. So you can say, hey, track by items this particular key. In this case, we are talking about the ID of the item, but it could be item.name, I could item.email, item.uuid, whatever. Or it could just be the item itself, in which the item itself is the identifier, which is the case for signals. Because if you started looking into signal-based components, you're going to see that the signals, when retrieving value, have to call the getter method, in which case the signal itself becomes the identifier. And this is also discussed in the RFC later on as well. So what is the detailed design? If you look at the actual code, this is what's going to be. So you're going to say, for example, if, and then you're going to say, hey, if I have, let's say, the user or the logged in user, then render this particular component. And also Angular recently introduced the self-closing tags as well. So this is much nicer. I wouldn't call this completely JSX, or maybe it was inspired by that, but I really liked it. But then you also can see that there are some discussions point on this RFC. And if you're an Angular developer, I would highly encourage you to go there and discuss these things and give your input as well, because the community is what really matters to Angular team as well, and to us. And by us, I mean the Angular experts or Gold developers experts in Angular. So look at these questions. For example, should we be using the hash sign, just like we discussed in the control flow? So it starts with a hash sign, it ends with a backslash sign. No, this is not the backslash, this is a normal slash. I always confuse between them. So the hash sign, it starts it, and then we have the slash that ends it. And then in the middle, if there are any nested blocks, then they would be represented by this colon. So that is the proposal that they have, but they have a question on, should we go with this or should we try something like this? And they also discussed, why they have chosen different approaches in this case. So additional things that they also tried was, if I scroll a bit down, there's a question on why hash at all. And that is because it differentiates the HTML with the control flow in general. Why are they not working with just something like this, like curly braces? Because this is something that you would see in React. Why not? That is because Angular also has something like double curly braces, and that makes it much more difficult to build that into the compiler itself. So that is pretty interesting. Just go through these questions and see if you find interesting things. One thing that I also would like to mention right here is just like we have different parentheses when we work with JavaScript or TypeScript, that hey, we say if, and then we have a small bracket starting and then the condition wraps in it, because you could have multiple conditions, right? That also is supported in this particular proposal. So you could have a bracket notation right here, which means that anything that you want around these parentheses or within these parentheses, you can put this. This is optional. Similarly, it goes for the for loop as well. Now, this means that your conditions here could be a bit more complicated, but the key here is that this whole bracket would always wrap the entire body of the block tag, which means that this is a block. So this would wrap entire body. You cannot just have brackets like on this one. This means that it's going to wrap all on this one. And then inside, maybe you can do some crazy stuff. All right, let's also look at some of the other things that I saw and that was also interesting. Yes. So one of the things that I also saw that is proposed in this control flow as well is if you look at this particular code where we have an ngIf and then we are looking at an observable and then we are saying async as user. So we are using the async pipes. We Angular developers have used this so many times. And here, if you compare this particular code chunk with TypeScript, TypeScript has also this keyword that says as, but that is usually used for typecasting. So we say something like, hey, we have this variable, like, I don't know, my input element as HTML input element. So Angular team wants that the proposed control flow code is also really close to TypeScript or as close as possible. So in the future, they might also be providing us the opportunity to type this in the template. So that's why there is a slight change. And the slight change in the proposed is, if you look at here, there is nothing separating this whole statement. So we say users observable with async pipe as users. In here, in the new proposed flow, we have the if condition, we have the observable, async, but then we have a semicolon, which sort of terminates this statement and tells Angular that, okay, I'm done with the observable and the pipe. And then we have a different as users. So when the Angular compiler reads that, it makes it much easier to differentiate between, are we using an alias, or are we talking about the TypeScript, typecasting in this case. So that's also really interesting to just see. And the idea behind that is obviously to support both signal-based components and also zone components, which are using observables, for example. All right. And yeah, we also have an explanation of why why not condition as name, and why do we have this semicolon right here as well. Do give it a read. Alrighty, we also talked about this thing. So we have the track by function to track. We already discussed this. One of the things also to consider is in the new control flow as well, we would have the same variables that we used today with ng4, like the index, first, last, even, odd. So they are going to be provided there, but they're going to be aliased via the let segment, just like this. We do something like this right now even, but just look at this and see, all right, where is the difference in this case? All right, now having said that, I'm gonna just show you one more thing that is important. When we're working with for loops now, or with this proposal, the track is mandatory. It is important to put there. Previously, the track by function was optional, so you could have that, you might not have it, but we Angular developers, when we were working with performance, we usually put that because of performance gains. But now in the proposal, this track is required, which means that if you don't have a key that you work on, as I mentioned before, just use the item itself, in which case the item is the identity, but still the track is required. All right. There's also another thing that was provided, the empty block. So if we don't have any items or the items list is empty, we do have something to render just like this. And this is super cool. Apart from that, Let me see. Yeah, I think one of the things that I would like to end this video with is migration considerations. So there are some proposals on how we could migrate our existing code, but the Angular team obviously wants to make sure that there are no breaking changes when we have that. So there are some approaches that they have mentioned. For example, just looking at the iterable differ case based on the associated DI tokens, for example, using the view child to query and find control flows, and then writing a schematic that could do it. So those are the kind of things that you might want to look into. But obviously, when the team is working on a new proposed control flow as a feature which is built in into the template and is going to be available for every Angular app going forward, and also since the Angular team plans to create more features on top of it, it is expected, and the team says that they are going to provide automatic migrations for the previous Angular project. One more thing that they have also said, that it is advised for all the Angular developers that they start migrating their code to the new control flow to sort of leverage the developer experience as much as possible. It doesn't mean that you have to do it. If your business doesn't require it, of course you don't. But if you want to leverage the new features, the new developer experience, make it easier to code Angular and work with Angular, obviously to be future proof as well, it is wise to migrate to the new control flow once obviously it gets stable. And obviously right now it's just in the RFC phase, so it needs a lot of discussion, a lot of iteration as well. But it's interesting to just go through these discussions and see, all right, how the Angular team actually takes inputs from the community and then works for it. The some of the alternates that was also considered with this control flow, instead of using this hash notation and then the slash and then the colon, is this one, which is sort of inspired from Svelte as far as I remember. But then the problem was, or it was from Mustache. No, no, no. This is the Mustache one. This is more likely with Svelte or Vue. I think I've seen this in Vue as well. But the problem with that as well is that then you'll end up with something like this, and they rejected it with a couple of reasons. So just go through and read through it. I don't think we need to go through all of that. I'm just gonna skim through if there was an interesting thing that I wanted to see here as well. I think one of the things that I also was looking for was how does the control flow work when it comes to content projection? And there was a question by someone as well. I think the community right now loves this track change, so we don't have to use the track by function. I love it, absolutely love it. There was also, yeah, this is the one for the content projection. I'm absolutely looking forward to this because this is something that I use quite a lot. I use content projection quite a lot to create dynamic components, and I would love to see a control block for this. One interesting thing to know is that these blocks, or this control flow blocks, these are some things that the Angular team right now says that they are going to implement that into the template engine, or into the template flow or template code. So this is not something that we would be able to define ourselves, not at least in the beginning, because they want to see how it goes forward. They might provide the library authors or the community the opportunity to do it later on, but there's no promise yet. So this is something that is expected to come out from Angular team, and yeah, we'll see then how this goes. I think I covered all of the things. I did see a lot of cool questions, a lot of interesting chat that happened even till the last comment that I just saw. I think it's amazing. To me, it seems like Angular is going in the right direction. They're experimenting with a lot of things. One of the things also is, since they want people to be able to take advantages of the new pattern, the old directives like ng4, ngif, ng-switch, they are going to be marked as deprecated, but they are obviously going to be removed after the community has adopted all of that knowledge. And this is mentioned in the RFC as well. You can go and have a look. But the idea for the Angular team is right now that discuss this, give it some time, let the community adopt it, let the community also provide feedback on how we can improve this, then just taking the input back, making sure that the content, like the books, the courses that the community is creating, they have this information updated. And when that's done, then of course just making it like the default and the to go way of writing Angular applications, and that obviously would take time. So my couple of stands at the end is, it is a new thing, it is a cool thing. I love where the Angular team is going with all of these experiments, with all of these improvements, with the developer experience, with the possibility to add new features, with the possibility of creating more performant applications as well, with all of these coming features as well. But that also makes some of the authors, or including myself, a bit scared when it comes to something new, because it's easy for me to understand, all right, something new is coming, it's going to take some time, nobody's going to start adopting this right away. There are businesses, like millions and millions of businesses out there who might be using Angular, so they won't switch right now, they won't switch today, and this will take time. So we as Angular developers would still be like, okay, this is something new. Let's see how this goes. And we'll start slowly adapting it, because this was also one of the questions when I went to Amsterdam recently in the Google I/O Connect. And there was Mark Thompson there, there was Alan there as well. And I don't recall the third person's name, but this was one of the questions, like from the community, that asked, what would you suggest the community or the businesses to adopt these new things that Angular is promoting? And the answer was really cool. And it was like, I would suggest them to adopt slowly. And that is the key. Nobody's switching to electric cars completely like 100% today. It's going to take some time. Similarly, whatever's coming out from the Angular team, of course, it's going to take some time. It's going to take some planning as well. And then the libraries to come up, or I should say, step up their game and then update. And then obviously the businesses can go and update their whole package, because even if Angular releases something new, unless you have all the dependencies figured out and all the dependencies are up to that mark, having that compatibility among them, you can't really update your business. So just take it slow, and let me know in the comments if you found this useful, if you found the insight useful, if you would want me to talk more about the RFCs or the features that are coming out. And as always, happy coding. I'm going to see you in the next one.